Hello everyone, and welcome back to the good stuff. We are returning to the Capablanca saga, as we've, already mentioned. We've shown one game from this tournament already. It's the Rise tournament of 1916 in New York, where Capablanca defeated in round 1 Mr. Roy Turnbull Black, and thank all of you for sending me that photo, as I couldn't find a photo, so I had to use the hoodie guy. But in this game, Capablanca faces Mr. Neville Williams Banks, and he was considered one of the few people that have mastered both checkers and chess. In his entire life, he played over 1,300 blindfold checkers games, and he played his first blindfold checkers game at the age of 6. And he was a very strong player, as you will see in this game. Throughout his career, one of the strongest players he defeated were Frank James Marshall, and he also defeated Isaac Kazhdan. If you haven't heard of him, it means you are a new subscriber to this channel. But I will put a link in the description below. The first thing you will see is a link to Isaac Kazhdan's Immortal game. I warmly recommend it to everyone. It's just a beautiful masterpiece. So if you have the time to check that out as well. But getting back to this game, this is round 2 of the Rice tournament, and Mr. Neville Williams Bank has the white pieces. He opens the game with e4, and I really enjoy this game, and you will see why. We have e5 by Capablanca, knight to f3, knight to c6, and of course Duri Lopez, bishop to b5. Capablanca goes for Morphy's defense. We have a6, and we have d exchange variation. Bishop captures, d captures, and now d4. If there are some newer, if you've just started learning about chess, maybe you're thinking about why not capture the e5 pawn. Well, it's just that after black goes queen d4, he attacks both your knight and your e4 pawn. You have to go back with the knight, and then black will just recapture the pawn. With check, you will have to block, and then black can either capture or develop the bishop. But either way, black at least equalizes, but even retains a better position. So after d captures on c6, exchanging a bishop for a knight, we have d4. E captures with queen captures, and knight captures, and bishop to d6 by Capablanca. So here, Mr. Neville Williams Banks decided to give up the bishop pair early. He went for the exchange variation, and now, as you'll see, he's a very strong player. We have castles by white, and now knight to e7. Already, you might think, but why not knight to f6? Well, this would be a tactical error. Even though it seems like you're developing a piece while attacking a pawn, white can just push e5 here, and now you can go bishop c5, and then it's playable, but you cannot capture the pawn. That's the problem, because rook e1 just wins the piece. So after castles, we have knight e7 by Capablanca. Knight to d2, a very excellent idea, because after Capablanca developed the knight to e7, the bishop no longer has this opportunity of returning to e7. And here, Mr. Banks wants to go bishop to c4 and rid Capablanca of his very strong bishop pair. Here, Capablanca castles, and we have knight to c4. Capablanca goes knight to g6, and now knight captures bishop on d6. And while you do rid Capablanca of his bishop pair, you also fix his pawn structure. So c captures on d6. We have bishop to e3, and now this is, here Capablanca decides he will give up the light square bishop for the knight, but that he also wants to open up the f file. Because after this happens, Capablanca pushes f5 with e captures, and now bishop captures. Knight captures and rook captures, and here Capablanca decided to go willingly into this endgame. He does have a knight against the bishop. The material on the board is equal, but there is one thing you have to see, that black will have a very nice game, because all of his pawns on the queen side are on light squares. He will push d5 at some point, and then all of the pawns will be on light squares. The dark square bishop, even though he can attack both sides of the board, he can't really do anything to threaten the pawns on light squares on the queen side. And due to the white pawns being on a, b, and c file, the rooks will have a hard time targeting the pawns. So it will be easier for Capablanca's knight to find targets than for Mr. Banks' bishop. So rook a to d1, going after the d6 pawn, and now just d5, and now f4. You might think, why not c4? Let's say pawn captures, and then play for some activity with rook to d7. It doesn't really work. Black will keep the extra pawn, just go rook f7, and even with rook f to d1, just rook e8, and there's no way of winning back the pawn. It's just pawn up for black. You can capture, and after captures, rook c7 check. You can just block rook e7. So white doesn't really gain anything. So even though you can try to play actively, you will not gain anything by it. So f4, here Banks wants to limit the movement of Capablanca's knight, taking away the e5 square from him, and also g3 is coming, so the h4 square will not be available for Capablanca's knight either. Capablanca goes rook to e8, attacking the bishop, and here is the first moment where it really shows that Mr. Banks isn't really on Capablanca's level. Here you have to play bishop to d2, but it's not at all clear right away. Here rook to f3 was played, just defending the bishop. Capablanca went rook to e4 with a triple attack against the f4 pawn, trying to bait out g3. And here g3 was indeed played. Here we have g3 by Mr. Banks. And now feel free to pause the video and try to find what was Capablanca's idea in this position. I'll give you a couple of seconds, as it is a very nice idea. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent maneuver of knights. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, knight to e5. That's the point. When you play the g3, the rook on f3 is no longer guarded. So pawn captures results in rook captures rook, and you know you're just down the exchange at least. So here you have to move the rook, and if you move the rook, well, you will lose the bishop, but it's not a problem as the knight is also under attack. But here Capablanca just wins a pawn and he enters a favorable endgame for him. So we have rook f to f1, and now comes rook captures on e3, pawn captures knight, and now Capablanca decides it's better to play this position with only a pair of rooks on the board than with two pairs of rooks. We have rook captures, king captures, and now rook captures on e5. Here Capablanca wins a pawn. And now it's a rook endgame with Capablanca being a pawn up. That's just a nightmare to play against, but Mr. Banks will of course try. We have rook to d3, just gaining some activity for the rook, a nice rook lift. You will be able to control both maybe black king, and maybe also try to attack Capablanca's queenside pawns. King to f7, not allowing the white rook to cut off the Capablanca's king. We have rook to b3, attacking the pawn, and now just rook to e7. Now Capablanca wants to get over to the, well, not there, but over to the queen side. The king will help out with the defense of the pawns, and then Capablanca can activate his rook and start pushing his extra pawn. Rook to f3 check, we have king to e8, and now the rook just returns, doesn't allow Capablanca's rook to activate. King to d8, and now rook back to f3. We have king to c7, and now the b7 pawn is guarded, and now rook to f8. White at least has to try something active. And finally c5. Capablanca starts pushing his passed pawn. We have b3, and now comes d4, and here king to f2. We have king to b6 by Capablanca, and now comes a3, at least taking away some of the squares here, so Capablanca's king cannot really enter the queen side. And now comes rook to e3, just a powerful move where Capablanca takes away any of the squares for the white king. The white king will not be able to increase his activity, and he's waiting for white to make a move. Here we have rook to f7, going after the king side pawns, but it doesn't work. Capablanca is simply too fast. So once again, as it is a really nice endgame, and you will often have an endgame where you will have a rook endgame being a pawn up, so you want to make the absolute best move. So once again, feel free to pause the video here and try to find the move Capablanca played in this position. Once again, I'll give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent endgame player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to c3. Capablanca's rook is much faster at gobbling up the pawns, but there is really no better move. Here, Banks played rook captures on g7, but we have rook captures on c2 with check. And now you can either go and try to protect the h2 pawn, but then Capablanca's passed pawn is just too fast. So here we have king to e1, and now just rook captures on h2 with while defending the h7 pawn. So rook to d7 doesn't allow the d pawn to be pushed, but now just king to c6. Rook to d8, and now rook to b2, attacking the queenside pawns. We have b4, c captures on b4, a captures on b4, and now rook captures on b4 while defending the d4 pawn. We have rook to h8, going after the h7 pawn, but now just a5. Now Capablanca has the outside pass pawn, and he will of course push it. We have rook captures on h7, and now a4. king to d2, Capablanca continues pushing, we have a3, rook to h1, you have to be able to block the passed pawn, we have rook to b2 check first, king to d3, and now we have a2, and here rook to a1. Here Capablanca created a very strong weakness here, and the rook will now have to constantly stay passive here. If you move the rook at any square, then just rook to b1 will either force a rook trade while promoting into a queen, but it's also just resigns material. So we have king to d5, we have g4, b5 now, Capablanca starts pushing his other pass pawn, g5, we have rook to g2, putting the rook behind white's pass pawn, but it's really not a problem as black is up 2 pawns. So g6 and now b4, and here white plays g7. So while there are well, a lot of moves here you can play, you can just push b3, which is perfectly fine. Capablanca goes for the laziest option as usual. He just captures the pawn, allows white to capture the a2 pawn, and now goes rook to g3. And here, of course, these squares are not available to you, so you have to go back, which means Capablanca will deliver check and pick up the rook on a2, and the white, of course, cannot avoid this. We have king to e2, and now comes rook to g2 check. King to d3, and now Capablanca captures the rook. Or does he? Well, of course he doesn't, because if he captured the rook, then it's stalemate. The king doesn't allow the white king to go anywhere forward. The pawn is guarding these 2 squares, and these 3 squares are covered by the rook, so this would be a pretty big mistake. So it's a nice trap set by Mr. Neville Williams Banks. Capablanca, of course, doesn't go for the rook. He plays rook g3 with check, king e2, and only now b3. The rook has to move. We have rook to a8, and now b2. Rook to b8, here we have king to c4, rook to c8 check, as of course you have to try a few checks before you resign. Here Capablanca played king to b3, and it was in this position on move 54 that Neville Williams Banks, the man who mastered both chess and checkers, resigned the game. Why did he resign? Well, there is nothing more to do here. You can deliver one check, but then after king c2 and another check, black can just cover up with the rook, and now you have really nothing to do. You can go rook b8, but here black will just bring a queen into the game, and after captures, it's well, black has a rook and a pawn, and the white doesn't, so it's pretty much self-explanatory. But yeah, after king to c2, Mr. Neville William Banks resigned the game, and a wonderful victory in round 2 of the Rice tournament in 1916 for Jose Raul Capablanca. Like I said, we will not be showing the entire tournament, but some of the games that I find really nice. And this game I found really nice because it's a really nice end game from the start. It's a Ruy Lopez, and white plays a nice game, but Capablanca finds that one inaccuracy that allows him to grab a pawn, and then he just, well, plays a better endgame and wins, which is very nice. I think it was a very educational, and it's always nice to see how Capablanca just plays normal principled moves, and it seems like the position wins itself, which is what everyone, of course, should strive for. But yeah, and like I said, if you're hungry for more chess, I warmly suggest the immortal game of Isaac Kazhdan that we already mentioned, the player that Neville William Banks defeated, as he was how to say it, a very a romantic player. All of his games were really aggressive, and this one is just a pure bloodbath. So do check it out. It will be the first link you will see in the description below. Just have an excellent evening. I mean, why not? So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I certainly have. I would like to thank Juan Alejandro de Armero Aguero, Cisco Bass, Adam Grippo, Barry McMurdoch, and Gregory Gallagher for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the Capablanca saga, checking up on your suggestions, and, well, seeing what's what as usual. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.